All right, welcome everybody to this webinar that we wanted to have on talking about financial inclusion in the wake of COVID-19. If you don't know me, my name is Wendy Chamberlain. I'm the Global Program Director for the BOMA project. I'm one of your hosts. My co-host is Channing Jiang. He's from Busara, and we are joined by 4 other organizations: Arifu, My Oral Village, and IDEO.org. That's 3, not 4, so the math is slow already. And we're really happy to have you here. I'm going to kick us off just with some basics on the agenda, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to be walking through the slide deck that we prepared for this afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining from. Great. All right, so you should have all received a copy of the agenda in the pre-reads. The pre-reads included just some light background reading on the organizations. We have packed a lot. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but we've packed a lot into 90 minutes. We debated about making this a 3-hour webinar, a 2-hour webinar, but we know time is precious and everybody has done endless amounts of Zoom calls. So we also know attention spans wane after a certain while. The point of me saying this is that we're going to be really dynamic in this experience, and we're going to solicit a lot of input from you in various formats and modalities. It also means that we may have some conversations that start, and we may have some conversations that don't get finished, but we look forward to having opportunities to continue those conversations later on, and we'll follow up with you after the webinar to figure out what's the best way to do that. So a little bit about the organizations presenting. So 6 of us got together and said, you know, we really think that there's an opportunity here to collectively discuss how last mile populations, those who are extreme poor or identified as ultra poor, are being affected by COVID-19, and what is the role that digital financial services can play for them. And so the parties that have come together include Arifu, which is a social enterprise that delivers access to content and training via SMS and WhatsApp-based chatbots. We have Busara, which is a research and advisory organization based in Nairobi, and they're dedicated to advancing and applying behavioral science in pursuit of poverty alleviation. We have the BOMA project. We are a poverty graduation program that is operating in northern Kenya and in Karamoja, Uganda. We have the David Weekley Foundation, which is a Texas-based philanthropy that supports scalable and sustainable endeavors. We have IDEO.org, which is a design research firm which leverages human-centered design to identify challenges and solutions that impact humanity. And we have My Oral Village, which is a design and research firm that works to address the digital divide experienced by last mile populations, focusing specifically on orality, literacy, and numeracy. So why are we here today? We think there's 4 important reasons to come together as this group. Already there's 61 of us. We anticipate there might be as many as 80 people joining this phone call, so it seems like other people think there's some things important here to talk about. Number 1 is pretty obvious. COVID-19 has had a really profound effect globally on millions of people, but it's also spurred a lot of innovations and adaptations. And we see that in particular where there's an opportunity here for digital financial services to respond to this moment. We really care about the impact of COVID-19 on vulnerable populations, and especially on women who are identified as extreme and ultra poor. We think that there are some gaps perhaps to be addressed in how these populations are reached, given the fact that many of them exist in areas that are low infrastructure and may not have accesses to the functional resources that deliver digital financial services in a sustainable way. We think financial inclusion is a really important aspect of this broader conversation because it's a really foundational element of building resilience. And lastly, we think this group of stakeholders who's here on this call can be a group who can help identify and figure out the solutions that we need to address this problem today. So what's our goal for today's conversation? So the goal is to discuss barriers that came out as top results in the survey that we shared with you. we want to leverage the expertise that are in the rooms and in this room, and we want to work towards identifying solutions that we can share and turn into practical action. And just to take a look at who's in the room, these are the different entities that are being represented on this call. We tried our best to have a very good mix of folks who have a good sense of the global ecosystem, the local ecosystem, the private sector, the implementation side, the donor side. I will call out, we are missing some government perspective, and we're missing the voice of the customer. And so for those of you who bring that experience or lens already in this conversation, we invite you to make sure to think about that and bring that to the table as we break out into our various discussions. But suffice it to say, we're really thrilled to have all of you who are joining here, and we want to thank you for your interest in giving your time to this conversation. So just some feedback. We sent out a survey, we asked people to respond, and we said, what do you think the biggest challenges are for rural women in using digital financial services during COVID-19? And we also asked, what do you think are some opportunities for improving usage of digital financial services during COVID-19? And here are some of the responses. This is not a massively scientific instrument, I will own that, but at least this is the feedback we heard initially. It turns out a lot of people feel like digital financial services for rural populations, they may not be as convenient as what people are using informally. Numeracy and literacy are also big challenges, and agent access remains a challenge as well. We also heard in terms of improving usage of DFS that it would be good to have picture or voice-based education materials for marketing. We heard that making sure there's an elimination of fees so that that is not a barrier, increasing agent networks, and also simplifying apps and alternatives for SMS would be helpful as well. So before I move on, what I'm going to do right now is turn it over to 3 different organizations. BOMA is one of them. I'll just also own that. But we're going to have My Rural Village share some real-time data from what they're seeing in the field. I've invited Tamara Cook from Financial Sector Deepening Kenya to also share some of the insights from their financial diaries. And then we're also going to share some insights from what we're seeing in Northern Kenya from BOMA's perspective. So Brett Mathews is the CEO and founder of My Rural Village, and he's going to share some insights as to how he's seeing COVID-19 play out for the populations he's focused on.
Thank you, Wendy. So we've been working with BOMA and seen some of the situation going on in the north. When the government sends money to Kenya, to Kenyans, they receive a notification in text and in Indo-Arabic notation. When the healthcare system sends advice on self-care during a pandemic, much of it arrives on the phone, again in text or Indo-Arabic notation. So what happens if the recipients are illiterate? Well, perhaps a recipient could ask her children or a literate member of her household. But what if there are no literate members in the household? According to the World Bank, 36% of Kenyan households are headed by women. Women are less likely to be literate than men, and their households are more likely to be in poverty. Pockets of illiteracy are particularly deep in some counties, such as those in the north where the BOMA project is working. And it turns out that most illiterate adults cannot read long numbers, such as those equal to $10 US or $100 US in their own currencies. Of course, $100 US is a 5-digit number in Kenya. Without help from someone outside the house, individuals who UNESCO calls isolated illiterates may not even realize they have been sent money or that the message on their phone contains important information. And even if they do realize it, they expose themselves to risk just by going into the community to get it decoded. There are ways to address this challenge now, both using voice and graphics, and the advent of smart feature phones powered by Kaios is giving us an equivalent of Android for the feature phone market that opens up many opportunities. By the time a second wave of this virus hits, can we be ready with clearer messaging for Kenya's most vulnerable households? I'll leave it there. Maybe.
Thanks, Brett. And I apologize, I should have asked you, I only showed this slide. You had a couple more slides. We had a couple more slides on here that I will show. So I'm showing the summary slide right now. We also have some details that I don't know if you want to take a moment to explain this slide here.
Yeah, that really is the core slide. So UNESCO has done a lot of work on this, and they find that isolated illiteracy is concentrated among older adults in the developed world, but among younger adults and especially women in the developing world. And in a country such as Kenya, where you have a very high fraction of female-headed households, and of course you still have that classic skew where women are less likely to be literate or numerate than men, you have a particular challenge to overcome when it comes to this.
Thanks, Brett. And hang on here. There's one more slide you have around literacy in Kenya.
Yeah, so the challenge of measuring literacy is a challenge. We haven't been doing a very good job of measuring it well. It tends to be measured by census data, and that systematically underestimates illiteracy because a lot of it is self-disclosure at the doorstep, and you can see that in the data here. The figures now are just kind of getting towards where they were in 2000. Technically, now that UNESCO is starting to do direct randomized testing, and but it's also important to note that because illiteracy concentrates in clusters, such as in the northern counties, you can have a situation where 70 to 75% of the population are literate and still have enormous areas rural areas where most women are still illiterate and many household heads are still illiterate, and you have many households which actually face the vulnerability of isolated illiteracy.
Thanks, Brett, for this. And I think just to context that again, I think the characteristics we're describing here are important to keep in mind when we think about pushes towards digital financial services, when there's strong messages in certain markets that cash can be a point of contamination in COVID-19. I can't see the participants right now fully on my screen. So Tamara, are you on the line? And if so, can you please share some insights from FSDK and the work that you've been doing around the financial diaries?
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to share something. I just saw Julie was on the line, so I feel a bit weird basically sharing her research. So she might pop in. Wendy asked me to just share, I think on the ground, some of the insights that we're seeing through the research that we commissioned with BFA Global to look at the Kenya Financial Diaries households and how COVID-19 is affecting them. The idea behind this research was this is a group of people who have had a past contact with these researchers, and so are comfortable answering deeper questions on a phone interview than they might otherwise, where most research is generally face-to-face. And so what I thought I would share was just a couple of the things that I found pretty surprising. There's a great series of blogs that have been authored by the BFA team on the insights that they're seeing, and I highly recommend checking them out, and there are more coming. They've now completed 199 interviews with households from across 5 different areas in Kenya, representing different environments, none in the north though. And so the couple of insights that I thought I would share was one that I found really interesting was the surprising, potentially, gender roles or benefits for women of some of the movements that are happening around COVID. So women were finding that children being sent home and men coming home sometimes were actually helping with household things and chores that they might not have helped with in the past. And the BFA researchers kind of posed, how might we keep some of these gender norms shifting? Another, I would say, hypothesis going in was that urban areas were going to be hit much worse than rural. And there's a really interesting blog looking at how rural households are also being hit quite hard. And so this kind of was a surprise to see how their incomes and livelihoods were being hurt as well. I think one of the most heartbreaking things has been the stories about the security deterioration across the country. And I think we've all seen that on the news, but hearing some of the more personal stories and worries from people and how that's being manifested in communities. I think some of the more recent stories have been around mob justice, when people have been resorted to stealing and things like that. And so I think that's something we all are aware of and recognize that it has implications. You know, obviously people have an income hit. So hustling has been affected by restrictions on the curfew and restaurants being shut down and other things, people being laid off from jobs. But in addition to the income going down, we're seeing pricing going up, with food prices being more expensive. And an example might be a town where they don't have vegetables in that town, and so they have to come from another town. And so the transportation costs or the ability to get those vegetables into that market are driving prices up. And then I think also there's been a lot of press around people getting cash transfers and people giving food and soap and all of that. But what the diaries researchers have found is that nobody's actually getting that support, at least none of theirs. It's not nationally representative survey or anything like that, but I still think it's interesting that none of the recipients so far have received any of that charitable or cash transfer support. Julie, if you wanted to add anything, I don't know if Wendy, if there's time, but.
Please go for it. Julie came in last minute, so thank you, Julie.
Yeah, sorry for that. I think that's a great roundup. I think one of the things we're definitely seeing complicated gender impacts playing out. There's a new blog that one of my colleagues just finished up today about some of the stresses on women, but I do wonder if we're thinking about new ways of deploying aid, if it's not a really good time, just because so many people have access to helpers right now that are trusted people in the home. So their kids are home from school, lots of their grown kids are home from the cities. So potentially a time when onboarding might actually be smoother than usual. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll share a few insights from BOMA's side as we've just completed a market assessment and have the analysis of it underway. Our findings are based on what we're seeing in northern Kenya. So focusing again on pastoralist populations for those of you who may not be familiar with the environs there. We are seeing from a market side, food is more expensive. So prices for staples are going up anywhere from 5 to 15%. Petrol is very expensive. The geographic restrictions that Kenya has put into place to respond to COVID has had an impact on supply and an impact on demand. Probably the biggest thing for us is in the north, where livestock is a primary means of livelihood. With livestock markets being shut down, this has a really severe impact on household level incomes. And because there's these challenges around supply and around steady forms of income, we're finding that any small businesses close to the household are having a hard time restocking. Pertinent to this conversation is that the majority of our businesses deal in cash because agent networks aren't prolific in the north. It's hard for people to get to those agent networks, and sometimes it takes upwards of $20 to travel to a place where you can be assured an agent has liquidity. So people are incentivized to sit on a large amount of cash. And so as we receive a lot of steady messaging around COVID-19 and that avoid cash, avoid corona, use digital financial services is some of the messaging we're hearing. That can create a bit of a tension about what a household should do about the amount of cash, physical cash they are sitting on, and what that means in terms of how they should leverage digital financial services when that doesn't always feel accessible, either because of the platform itself or the physical agent location. The last thing I'll say is, in an age of social distancing, we can't use savings groups the way we normally leverage them in our program, which means the way people use informal financial services or platforms like savings groups, we have to think about different adaptations. We are all going to get a chance to talk more about these barriers in the discussion session. And if it's already beginning to provoke thoughts or comments or references to articles like what you just mentioned, Julie, please put those links in the Google Doc that we mentioned at the beginning of the call for articles. But if you have questions or provocative insights you want to share, put them into the chat. All right, so what I want to do is we're going to move into our next session, which is going to get us ready to have a design session and a design discussion in breakout groups. So we're going to take this group of almost 70 people now, and we're going to divide you up into 6 focus groups. And 2 groups will each discuss the same problem statement. And these problem statements are based on what we heard both from the survey outputs that we shared, that convenience is a barrier. Digital financial services right now are not as convenient as cash. Agent access and liquidity is a challenge, and numeracy and literacy are also challenges. These statements are also based on real life stories that we have heard from our experience in the North. And so we haven't like fabricated this whole thing in order to give you a problem statement to respond to. I'm not going to read through the problem statements in their entirety. You can go ahead and do that right now on your own screen. But what I want to explain is just about what is going to happen next. In your groups, you have a facilitator and a rapporteur. Your facilitator is someone who's going to walk you through a lengthier problem statement around this question that we've put here on the screen. And in your breakout room, you're going to spend time discussing the problem statement and coming up with a solution. It's only 30 minutes, so use your time wisely. And what we're going to do at the end of that 30 minutes is we are going to then have a very fast 15-minute sharing out discussion of what was the solutions that you came up with. The satisfying thing about this will be that everyone can contribute. The dissatisfying thing about this is that there's probably a lot of conversations that will only get started partially, and we have a lot more that we need to probably say about them. So keep that in mind, and we're well aware of that tension too. You will be moved automatically into the breakout rooms shortly. There will be a countdown timer showing up on your screen. And you will be moved automatically from your breakout rooms back into the main discussion. So for those of you who have experienced breakout rooms, you'll know what the deal is. For those of you who are new, you don't have to do anything, just sit and enjoy the experience, okay? So if there's anything more, I think, Channing, we're ready to proceed to that next section. Everyone for joining in those breakout discussions. This is really cool. I get to see a lot of folks I haven't seen for a while. So I love this view. If some of you feel like breaking out into songs simultaneously, that's appropriate in the Zoom environment we're in. At any rate, I hope the conversations were productive in your breakout sessions, and I hope that they led to some concrete solutions. We've been successful in getting some time back, and we might be able to actually have a little bit longer discussions than what we planned for. Here's what's going to happen in the next 15 to 20 minutes. Each group is going to present, and I'm just going to repeat the instructions I gave at the beginning of the call. So each breakout group is going to present. It is not a lengthy presentation. You, as the rapporteur, are going to say, this was the problem we discussed and the question we answered. Don't need to read the whole problem statement. And then you're going to say, and our solution was X. Now, if your group also had the same problem statement to address and you're up next, you don't need to say and repeat the exact same thing verbatim. You can say, oh, we had the same solution, or you could say, actually, we had a different solution and here's what we came up with. So that's how this is going to go. And then we'll have a few minutes of discussion, and then I'm going to move us on to the next group. So there are 6 groups in total. There are 3 problem statements. So if you were we'll start with group 1A. And if you're the rapporteur for 1A, go ahead and you're the first to go. We'll have you share the problem statement, or share the report back, excuse me. And I think you should be able to share your screen as well if that's easier. But if not, just go ahead and report out what the solution that you came up with is.
Yeah. Hey, this is John. So we were dealing with Halima and her challenges. I don't think it's going to work to share my screen. So let me just go through these. So we had a number of, I would say, pathways to solutions. Oh, hey, there we go. Let's see, so access to helpers at home, other children being able to onboard mothers like Halima to work around barriers with digital finance. educating Halima on how to save using mobile money, training savings groups on using mobile money, looking at the government in Kenya specifically through something like HSNP to provide solutions to last mile households. A big issue I think throughout this was overcoming issues with trust from users and even agents and other participants to adopt new behaviors with digital financial tools, overcoming that trust issues. We had a great suggestion around drone banking, which is a brand new term for me and probably a brand new term for a lot of folks, but very interesting around how drones, which are already being used to distribute certain products, could be used for banking. And then we talked a bit about, at the cash agents, issues with utilizing social distancing protocols and how that would be transmitted and communicated to users, perhaps over the phone, about the kind of the protocol of how far to stand apart and how to kind of hand over and receive cash. Yeah, and I think this final comment about leveraging network effects between all the users out there to build on that trust and security of using these new tools and products. So a lot of different ideas about, I would say, pathways towards some of these solutions.
Okay, thanks 1A. You took the extra challenge of coming up with multiple solutions instead of one, but we'll give you that. 1B, if you could please share, and if someone, just for the benefit of the group, could you just recap the question around Halima so people have that reminder in the back of their heads as they're hearing these solutions being narrated out? Thank you. So Halima is trying to conveniently continue her business. She's trying to make use of her cash and contribute to savings, but this is a challenge in light of COVID-19 where she is being told that cash is a potential mode of contamination. All right, so 1B, do you want to please share the solutions that you came up for this one?
Yes, Wendy, it says that Osman is using the share screen function, so I can't share my screen.
Maybe Osman, you could be the...
Okay, well, he's in a different group. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to try again. So, sorry, folks. This is where the technology breaks down here when the person using it is not adept sharing screen. Okay, there we go. Coming up. Hopefully you can see it. So I'm going to, again, since we're just limited to one, we were focusing very much on the question of the limited infrastructure, which makes it difficult to use mobile money. So one of the things as we were thinking, there's several people raising points about different incentives. There's a set of incentives to agents through commissions and other things that hopefully helps them expand the network and perhaps might even be used in a way to encourage lower fees, because we know that fees are part of the problem for people to use mobile money. But there's also the issue of if you're in a remote village, you have to travel a long way to that agent. You need to have a cash out place much closer to you. And then within the village itself, the other thing would be is to actually have some stores who would actually be offering you the opportunity to keep money on your wallet and use mobile money for transactions. Right now, as most of you know, that there's limited cash out places in terms of shopkeepers. So this is an important thing. You can see some of the other things we talked about here. And lastly, one of the major unknowns is, we really don't understand enough yet about how people have their income generating opportunities. So other than a government transfer, how do they get their money? What does it take for them to put that money into a mobile wallet? And do they still have those income generating opportunities? If they've lost them, some of these points are kind of moot. What we see in the case of Halima is that she's really eating into her savings. It's not clear that she has as much of an income coming in as she used to. So the only other thing I'd like to just really quickly highlight is we shouldn't ignore that She was a member of a savings group, and although the savings group has stopped, there could be a way to leverage savings group processes and structures and solidarity so that maybe they could have a phone tree where they encourage one another to save something in a tin can, no longer with the group, but just to reinforce the savings message. And also, of course, it would create some bonds of solidarity, perhaps if there was an emergency response, that social fund could still be activated. That's it.
Thanks, David. So we have time for a few questions and reactions from the broader group to the solutions that this group has come up with, and any thoughts that this might have provoked in your minds or based on your experience or your vantage point as to what can be considered. Things I'm hearing as a recap that Halima might consider in her situation is that maybe there's incentives that are put in place to help her keep cash digital. So she sees the value add of going cashless versus holding on to tangible physical cash. Also just hearing about this idea of how do we leverage savings groups in an age of social distancing when the groups cannot physically meet, and what does that look like, especially for people who are, we're talking about people who are using USSD, they're not using smartphones. So what does that look like? I will take a few questions or comments. Shannon, can you see on your side if folks want to just chime in? Maybe we'll try it that way and see what happens. Any reactions or thoughts?
This is for the government side. I was talking to Mark Bevois from Catholic Relief Services about what would he recommend to governments and to do in this time, and he said it might be a simple solution, but allow group accounts. That most countries don't allow group savings accounts, and that makes it difficult to do savings digitally, savings groups digitally.
Thanks, Larry. Any other comments, reactions? Okay, let's move on to the next group. We have group 2A who's going to report back. And why don't you, again, for the sake of this broader group, share the, put the problem statement on the screen with the question that you're answering, but don't read the whole problem statement, just share, just so you can read through the question, and then share with us the solution that you came up with. And please note the chat box, people are using that also for comments and feedback. I noticed Janine just put something in there as well, so you can use that for ongoing discussion too. Thanks, Janine.
Sure.
So group 2A.
Yeah, just sharing my screen now. And yeah, so the issue that basically we have discussed is the challenge or the issue that cash transfer agents face around access and liquidity. Now, we discussed a lot, like we have multiple solutions, as you can see, like I've highlighted the ones that, you know, like the potential good ones in yellow. Some insights, some interesting insights that we came across, that it's not just the agents that face liquidity issues, but the local banks too, because, you know, agents face an issue, they reach out to the local banks for cash, but the smaller banks, they are running out of cash too. So they have to like sort of go to the bigger banks to get the cash. So it's not just the agents, but sometimes the local smaller banks too. In terms of solutions, we have quite a few. I'll just like read out the main ones. First thing, some sort of, you know, development of a mechanism. So the cash sort of goes directly to the merchant and merchant distributes the goods. So this kind of, you know, alleviates the problem of liquidity to some extent. The other thing to sort of encourage more digital financial solutions is to, you know, and to encourage people to use digital money and to use financial services is to make $1 of digital money more, like worth more than $1 of cash. So sort of counter all the inconvenience that you have to face while using that. And other than that, I think one thing which our agent sort of highlighted, or which was highlighted in the problem, that our agent was also worried that, you know, this can be the hub for virus transmission. So one thing that can happen is that agents can be a node for public health information dissemination too. and they can, sort of install hand washing stations, have supplies, practice social distancing, etc. So yeah.
Great, thank you 2A. Group 2B, did you have a different response out of your solution set?
Yes, hi everyone. I'll just share my screen very quickly. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so we didn't come up with one solution, and I'll just run through them very quickly. So the very first one was to stagger the payments, the cash transfers that are going to the beneficiaries. And one example was given from a social protection program in Zambia. And one thing to note is that this was not a conditional cash transfer, so it was a one-off transfer. And just to think about ways to stagger such payments so that the demand for cash outs are reduced or spread across different time periods. And then another example was to front load the conditional cash transfers such that a lot of the beneficiaries have a lot of money at the same time, and they're able to, once their shocks are sort of cushioned, they don't feel the pressure to always run to the agents to cash out. Then similar to what Group A had was to use the agents as like advocates to disseminate information to the community, but ours was to use them to get people to understand more about the digital financial services options that are available to them so that they don't always have to come and cash out and generally not rely on cash. Then another solution we thought about was to expand to work with the programs to provide different options. So we have situations where some programs will partner with just one FSP, and that puts a burden on the agents that may be tied to that particular service provider. And then the last solution was clear communication to the recipients of these cash transfer programs that the cash should always be available. So they don't all have to go to the access points at the same time to cash out. So yeah, that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandana. So with this particular response, I mean, anyone is able to respond, but I am actually curious to hear from those of you who have depth of experience with agent networks or come from a private sector lens. What about this idea of providing an incentive so that $1 digital is worth more than $1 cash, or a shilling digital is worth more than a shilling cash? Is that feasible? What does that look like? Also, this idea of front loading and staggering payments and conditional cash transfers, is that something that's realistic to consider, and under what would have to happen around that? So just a couple questions to throw out on the table. Again, thanks to those of you who are also joining on the chat. The chat will be recorded, so we can share that back out too, by the way.
Just coming in quickly there, Wendy. I'm reminded of a BRACED. So this was a program around climate resilience in Northeast Kenya that was feeding back on results last year. And one thing they noted was that the agents in parts of the Northeast, particularly in parts of remote Northeast, were being paid by the community a little bit extra, right? Just to stay open, to help manage liquidity, in addition to any of the M-Pesa, the obvious payments that you have to make on mobile phones. And the community was prepared to do that because the agent was the only source of cash around when they needed it. So in dealing with this problem, we'd need to take that into account.
Thanks, Fiona. Other thoughts either on what Fiona is suggesting or thoughts around this idea of front loading cash transfers or incentives?
Wendy, I wonder whether the question as to whether it's possible to make a digital dollar worth more than a physical one. I mean, MNOs, any interest they earn on the cash that's staying in a bank, they can't use it to advance their business per se. But I wonder whether there's potential for that funding to then be used to go towards driving use of digital cash, since now it's almost a government directive that we should be going digital. So I'm just thinking through, like, from a business point of view, where does that additional money come from? If there's this fund that cannot be used for any other purposes other than something that's considered almost CSR, perhaps there's a way to think through how that fund can be used to drive that.
Thanks, Christabel. I'm going to move us to the next. Oh wait, Caroline, it looks like you're
No,
going to say
I was just
something.
going to. I was just going to say on front loading, we're already seeing large schemes changing the payment terms, primarily in two different ways: making payments in advance, the front loading that you're talking about, but also increasing the frequency of payments. So some schemes that have 3 monthly payments are now changing to monthly to try and ease the flow of money. So we're seeing that. In Ethiopia, Malawi, and South Africa, there's those changes in the payment terms for the programs.
Thanks, Caroline. If you, by the way, if you aren't on mute, could you please go on mute so we don't get a collective background noise? Thank you. Cool. And if you have, if anybody has research or evidence to share along these lines, please put it in the chat or in the Google Doc. Group 3, who discussed problem statement 3, dealing with numeracy and literacy. Let's have 3A report and then 3B.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet, but we can't wait to.
Go ahead, Rahab, I'll share the screen.
There we go.
Okay. So we looked at the case of Jane. Jane is a trader, livestock trader in northern Kenya. She's illiterate, can't read, can't speak Swahili. She doesn't own a mobile phone. She borrows her husband's phone to receive calls. And so we considered 2 challenges. One is, how can she receive information on COVID-19? And then 2, how can we incentivize her to use mobile money? So we came up with a couple of insights and potential solutions to solve that. The first insight was around the possible misinformation that could be occurring because the current messaging is not in the appropriate format. She can't read, but she can read, she can read signs and pictures. Number 2, her usual circle of information may have broken down, and it's not possible to tap into a wider network because of mobility issues. So for potential solutions, we considered gamified voice prompts to overcome the text literacy. And then we also looked at use of community health workers to safely pass information. Now here, we know that community health workers are still working, but we were concerned about proximity, given the vastness of the area, how much can they actually cover, how many of the households can they actually cover. And then we considered radio, vernacular radio, which we think would be a good tool for passing consistent information. And this information can also be used to train community health workers, either using voice calls or any other means, just so that there's consistency of information being passed. One other unknown that we identified was, what language to use for the voice prompt. So because she doesn't speak Swahili, we might have to consider looking at prominent vernacular languages and dialects in the area, just to make sure that information is being passed appropriately. And then the second one, Channing, I can't see the screen now.
I'm just going to give a little quick time check because we have about 4 minutes to finish this section. Maybe we can jump to the next group.
Let's actually do that for right now. Rafa, why don't we have 3, Rahab, so thank you for that. Why don't we have 3B share their outputs? Thanks, Channing.
3B is empty right now. Could the rapporteur maybe just make some comments on what you discussed?
Yes. Can you guys see my screen? I'm trying to share my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, so maybe just, I think we had the same issues, which would be for Jane, would be misinformation or mistrust because of lack of valid evidence to get information. We also had the rising food prices due to restrictions and instant validations where she may need to verify that either she's received money or the money that has been sent, but she may be restricted because due to her illiteracy. Potential solutions, I think the same group shared, the group A shared 3A around training or use of radio or local languages by Safaricom or government, and also building on existing infrastructure of the CSVs and chiefs, local chiefs to deliver training. So use of voices they trust to combat mistrust and misinformation. We also have agent offices include learning shops and graphical guidance. So pictorials to facilitate them to learn through visual aids. Because her husband had a smart feature phone or a phone, we could have shareable apps with a mix of graphics and voices to facilitate training Jane on COVID-19 and maybe on mobile money usage. And we can also make use of edutainment if would be possible with the correct maybe distancing measures, where we would act out things like hand washing, things like use of M-Pesa to facilitate better modes of learning. So we also looked at some of the unknowns, which was ability to access Wi-Fi or being able to pay for the Wi-Fi. Also access to the mobile money agents in where Jane comes from. They're even agents, if they're even near. So absence of a validation process. How would we know she has received the funds? So like voice. We're also assuming that she has ID and ability to charge her phone, meaning has access to power. Also, relationship with the person that Jane is sharing the phone with. Can she borrow the phone at all times to see money or to receive money if there's a aid going out? So that is what we had as a team. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious that our friends on West Coast, Central, and East Coast US are likely diving into meetings right after the top of the hour, while some of us on the other side of the globe are going to dive into some sort of meal at the end of the day. So we'll wrap up shortly. So first of all, we thank you everyone for taking the time to share outputs. We will share all of this content. What is striking to me is that in many cases, this conversation is no different than many financial inclusion conversations probably many of us have participated in. Really what is different is the urgency that COVID-19 brings to the situation where people are being propelled into a digital financial service environment that they may not have been prepared to really go full steam ahead into. And just to share back, you know, listening to the themes that come across consistently from these three different problems are around providing incentives, making sure there's clear communication, and we've talked about in other groups about having coordinated communication. So you're not hearing 5 different messages from 5 different groups, but that message is really tight from government, from private sector, from the social sector as well. We need to think about how to make sure that's tight and find the right catchment areas where we can deliver that communication to people so it will be relevant and meaningful. And then just really thinking about this payment delivery mode and how to unpack and unlock what these barriers are. So what happens next? This is the slightly dissatisfying part of these meetings when we have 4 minutes left and we've opened a really big discussion point. The group that organized this, we are quite keen to carry on this conversation with as many of you that want to be involved in it. We think this is a problem that's relevant to Kenya, but we think this is a problem that's relevant to many global markets, and the ability to discuss it and come and try to put action around these solutions we've talked with is really imperative in our minds in light of COVID-19. So we're going to do a few things. We're going to be sharing outputs, like I said. We're going to be sending out a survey from this program to say, are you interested in joining a bigger conversation or having more conversations around this? And how can we get involved with it? And we want to hear from you as well. What are you working on? How can you, what kind of feedback would you like from different people who are a part of this group too? So with 3 minutes to spare, before we wrap up, any last minute thoughts, burning questions, things like that, that you would want to make sure you throw into the mix before we go?
Hi, Wendy, this is Winnie. Actually, I just dropped in something on the chat. And I'm thinking that as much as we are talking about financial inclusion and all that, but in a time of pandemic like this, we need to think about a multi-sector approach, because there are certain things that we might not be able to do just by providing financial access. You know, we talk about distancing, social distancing, you know, to kind of stop the spread of the COVID-19. But at the same time, we want as many as possible people to get access to the financial support that they're supposed to get. So how do we do this? As a financial provider, you're not able to do this on your own. So I'm looking at how do we engage other sectors, you know, so that they provide the kind of service that they're able to provide in their own space. And then the financial provision people are also doing theirs, but in collaboration. So that is something I thought that we need to think about in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Any other last minute comments in the remaining 2 minutes of our time? That's a loaded question, by the way, in and of itself, because no one wants to be that person to cut everybody late. So let me take that on myself and say, thank you all for joining the conversation. Thank you for helping us get it started. We're keen to follow up with you. We are as a group actually meeting right after this to figure out the next steps. If you have burning feedback on any of the presentations, please email the presentation leads directly. We will make those available, their email addresses available to you. As I mentioned, we'll share in the chat, we'll share out the chat results as well, because some great links and discussions have been put in there. And we look forward to staying engaged on what we think is a really relevant topic. So thank you for joining. Thank you for joining our Zoom experiment as well. You all passed.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.